The year was 1992. On the Warner Brothers lot in Burbank, California, the air was thick with the smell of expensive hairspray, hot studio lights, and the burning friction of millions of dollars on the line. To the world, this was the set of The Bodyguard, the film that was destined to turn Whitney Houston from a pop princess into a Hollywood queen. But inside her luxury trailer, far away from the cameras, a horror story was unfolding that no scriptwriter would dare to write. Whitney was doubled over in agony, gripping her stomach, her face washed of all color. She was pregnant with Bobby Brown's child, a baby they desperately wanted, a baby that was supposed to be the bridge over their already troubled waters. But in the cruel silence of that trailer, she was losing it. Most people would have called an ambulance. Most productions would have shut down. But Whitney Houston wasn't most people. She was a black woman carrying the weight of a $40 million investment on her shoulders. She knew the whispers in the industry. They were waiting for her to fail, waiting for her to be difficult. So, she did the unthinkable. She wiped her face, instructed her makeup artist to hide the pallor of her skin, and walked out onto stage 16. She stood under those blinding lights, looked into Kevin Costner's eyes, and played the role of a woman falling in love, while piece by piece, her own heart was breaking inside her body. This wasn't just acting. This was a level of psychological dissociation that would set the tone for the rest of her life. She was learning the most dangerous lesson of fame: the show must go on, even if the person inside the costume is dying. Can you imagine the sheer will it takes to smile for the world while you are bleeding in secret? If you want to peel back the layers of the legends we thought we knew, subscribe now. Because the truth is always hiding in the dark. To truly understand the catastrophe that followed, we have to look at the man waiting for her back at the hotel. In 1992, Bobby Brown wasn't just a husband, he was the self-proclaimed king of R&B. He was the bad boy with the platinum hits, the swagger, and the ego to match. When he married Whitney, he felt like the prize. He was the street-smart edge that gave her credibility. But as the filming of The Bodyguard progressed, the tectonic plates of their relationship began to shift violently. Bobby arrived on set expecting to be treated like royalty, but he quickly realized that in Hollywood, he was just Mr. Houston. Security guards didn't know his name. Producers looked through him to get to Whitney. Every time a fan screamed for her and ignored him, a crack formed in his fragile masculinity. He watched as his wife transformed into something he couldn't control, a global icon. Instead of being proud, Bobby felt threatened. He began to see her success not as a victory for their family, but as an attack on his manhood. The snide comments started as whispers. "They're using you," he'd say. "You're acting different." He wasn't supporting her, he was planting landmines in her mind. He needed her to be small so he could feel big. And Whitney, sensing his insecurity, began to apologize for her own shine. She started shrinking herself to fit into the box he had built for her, a box that was getting smaller by the day. Have you ever loved someone who made you feel guilty for your own accomplishments? Then there was the Kevin Costner factor. On set, Costner was everything Bobby wasn't. He was protective, gentle, and deeply respectful of Whitney's talent. He famously fought the studio executives who wanted to lighten Whitney's skin on the movie poster or downplay her race. "She's the one," he told them. "She's beautiful as she is. For a woman whose husband was constantly chipping away at her self-esteem, Costner's reverence was like fresh air in a suffocating room. But for Bobby Brown, Kevin Costner was the ultimate enemy. Bobby would visit the set and watch them. He saw the chemistry. He saw the way Costner held her hand just a little too long after the director yelled, "Cut," to make sure she was okay. It drove him mad with jealousy. But it wasn't a romantic jealousy, it was a status jealousy. Costner represented the white, elite Hollywood establishment that Bobby felt excluded from. Seeing his wife accepted into that club while he was left at the gate triggered a rage in him that he took out on her behind closed doors. He accused her of selling out, of wanting to be white, of leaving her roots behind. He weaponized her identity against her. Every scene where Frank Farmer saved Rachel Marin was a reminder to Bobby that he was no longer the hero of his wife's story. Why is it that toxic partners often try to destroy the very safety nets that keep us from falling? November 25, 1992. The world premiere of The Bodyguard at the Chinese Theater in Hollywood. If you look at the archival footage, it looks like a fairy tale. Flashbulbs popping like lightning, fans screaming, Whitney looking like a goddess in her beaded gown, Bobby by her side in a shark suit. They held hands. They smiled. They waved. But if you pause the video and look closely at their eyes, you see the tension. The limo ride to that premiere wasn't a celebration, it was a Cold War. Sources from that night suggest that the atmosphere was icy. Whitney was exhausted, physically from the grueling schedule and the miscarriage recovery, and emotionally from managing Bobby's volatile moods. Bobby was reportedly erratic, agitated by the attention Whitney was getting. He felt invisible in the sea of reporters shouting, "Whitney! Whitney!" She spent the biggest night of her career not basking in her triumph, but walking on eggshells, terrified that Bobby would cause a scene or storm off. She was managing his ego while the world worshipped her. It was a masquerade ball where everyone wore a mask of happiness, but underneath, the foundation was rotting. That night set the template for the next decade, Whitney soaring to the heavens, and Bobby acting as the gravity dragging her back down to hell. Do you remember watching that premiere on the news, completely unaware of the storm brewing behind the smiles? And then, the song dropped. "I Will Always Love You." It wasn't just a hit record, it was a cultural tsunami. It sold 400,000 copies in its second week alone. It stayed at #1 for 14 weeks. You couldn't turn on a radio, walk into a grocery store, or sit in a dentist's office anywhere on earth without hearing that drum beat and that soaring voice. For the world, it was the ultimate love song. For Bobby Brown, it was the soundtrack to his nightmare. Imagine being a famous singer yourself, but everywhere you go, your wife's voice is drowning you out. It was inescapable. The industry jokes became cruel. Comedians called him Mr. Whitney Houston. Tabloids speculated on his jealousy. And the worst part? The song is technically a breakup anthem. Every time Whitney sang, "I Will Always Love You," Bobby heard, "I Don't Need You." It drove him into a paranoid frenzy. He began to compete with her. If she bought a car, he bought two. If she had an entourage, he doubled his. He was trying to buy back his relevance with her money. And Whitney, desperate to keep the peace, allowed it. She let him spend, she let him posture, she let him play the big shot, hoping it would be enough to buy his love. It never was. How dangerous is it when a partner's success feels like a personal failure to the other? We often focus on the physical violence that came later in their marriage, the 911 calls, the split lips. But in the early 90s, the violence was largely psychological, which in many ways is more insidious because it leaves no visible scars for the world to see. It was the gaslighting. It was the systematic dismantling of her confidence. Bobby knew Whitney's deepest insecurity. She was terrified of losing her street cred, of being seen as too pop, too white, or too perfect. So, he attacked her right there. He called her proper. He mocked her diction. He brought his hood friends around to emphasize how different he was, making her feel like an outsider in her own home. He convinced the most famous, talented, and beautiful woman in the world that she was boring and stiff without him. He made her feel that she needed his edge to be interesting. This is the classic abuser's playbook: isolate the victim, make them feel worthless, and then present yourself as the only person who truly understands them. Whitney began to believe him. She started dressing differently, talking differently, trying to emulate his swagger to prove she was worthy of him. She was winning Grammys, but at home, she was losing her soul. Is emotional abuse harder to escape than physical abuse because you can't show anyone the wounds? It was during this specific period, the post-Bodyguard explosion, that the drug use shifted gears. Before this, Whitney had dabbled. She partied. But now, cocaine and marijuana became necessary survival tools. We have to ask why. Why would a woman who has the world at her feet need to numb herself every single day? The answer is heartbreakingly simple: drugs were the only place where she and Bobby were equal. When they were high, the power dynamics dissolved. There was no superstar Whitney and jealous Bobby. There were just two people floating in a haze. It was a chemical truce. The drugs allowed Whitney to lower her vibration to match his. They silenced the voice in her head that whispered, "He is destroying you." They numbed the physical pain of the miscarriage she never fully grieved. They blurred the sharp edges of his insults. The tragedy is that the higher her career flew, the deeper she had to dive into the fog to cope with the vertigo. She wasn't just getting high to party, she was getting high to endure the life she had built. Do we judge addiction too harshly without asking what pain the person is trying to sedate? In March 1993, in the eye of this hurricane, Bobby Christina was born. To Whitney, this child was the miracle. She was the redemption for the baby lost on the movie set. She was supposed to be the glue that finally bonded Bobby to her forever. There is a common, tragic misconception in troubled marriages that a baby will fix everything, that a child will bring peace to a war zone. For a fleeting moment, it seemed to work. The photos from the hospital show a genuine softness in Bobby's eyes. But a baby brings stress. It brings sleepless nights, crying, and a shift in focus. For a narcissist like Bobby, the baby was yet another person competing for Whitney's attention. He wasn't the center of her universe anymore, Bobby Christina was. And for Whitney, the pressure was unimaginable. She was now the mother of the heir to the throne, the wife of a volatile star, and the biggest commodity in the music business. She took the baby on the road. She tried to be the perfect mother, the perfect wife, and the perfect diva all at once. It was an impossible balancing act. The cracks didn't heal, they widened. Bobby Christina didn't save the marriage, she was born directly onto the battlefield, a tiny hostage in a clash of titans. Have you ever seen a couple try to use a child as a bandage for a bullet wound? Here is a fact that film historians often overlook. After The Bodyguard, Whitney Houston could have been the biggest movie star of the 1990s. She had the presence, the timing, and the box office power. Scripts were piling up at her door, major blockbusters, romantic comedies, dramas. But she turned almost all of them down. Between The Bodyguard, 1992, and Waiting to Exhale, 1995, there is a mysterious gap. Why? Because going on a movie set meant leaving Bobby. It meant spending 14 hours a day in a world where he couldn't control her, surrounded by leading men who adored her. There are stories of Bobby making it difficult for her to work, of creating massive drama right before big meetings, of accidentally making her late. It was a subconscious sabotage. If she was too stressed to work, she would stay home. If she stayed home, she was his. We were robbed of seeing Whitney's full potential as an actress because her creative energy was being siphoned off by a vampire in her own living room. She sacrificed her ambition on the altar of her marriage, hoping that if she made herself smaller, he would finally stop feeling so threatened. What masterpieces did we miss out on because Whitney was too busy managing the chaos at home? By 1994, the stress began to manifest physically. The voice, that crystalline, 3-octave instrument that was a gift from God, began to show the first signs of wear. It wasn't just the smoking, it was the screaming. The arguments in the mansion were legendary. Screaming matches that lasted until dawn, followed by days of silence. The vocal cords are muscles, and they react to emotional stress. They tighten when you are afraid, they constrict when you are holding back tears. Whitney was essentially strangling her own instrument with her suppressed emotions. She started canceling concerts. She claimed throat nodules or allergies, but the people close to her knew the truth. Her spirit was being crushed, and her voice was the first casualty. She would go into the studio and struggle to hit notes that used to be effortless. And every time her voice cracked, Bobby's power grew. If she wasn't the voice, then who was she? Just Mrs. Brown. It was a terrifying realization for her, and a perverse victory for him. The golden bird was beginning to forget how to sing. What happens to our identity when the one thing that makes us special starts to fade away? For a long time, the machine, the publicists, the record label, the handlers, kept the lid on the boiling pot. They sold us the image of the happy couple. But by the mid-90s, the mask was slipping. Whitney was showing up late to events. She was looking thinner. The spark in her eyes was being replaced by a glazed, frantic look. In interviews, she became defensive, over-articulating her happiness, laughing a little too loud, trying to convince us, and herself, that everything was fine. We, the public, watched it happen, but we didn't understand what we were seeing. We thought she was just being a diva. We made jokes about her erratic behavior. We didn't realize we were watching a woman in the middle of a nervous breakdown. We didn't see the bruises on her soul. We just wanted another hit song. We consumed her pain as entertainment. The media began to turn on her, contrasting classy Whitney of the 80s with this new, unpredictable version. They didn't ask, who is hurting her? They asked, what is wrong with her? The narrative shifted from adoration to judgment, pushing her further into Bobby's isolation. How much responsibility does the audience bear when we watch a star burn out and just ask for more fire? Looking back with the clarity of hindsight, the bodyguard era wasn't just the peak of her career, it was the point of no return. The patterns established in those 24 months, the jealousy, the isolation, the drug use as a coping mechanism, the sacrifice of self, became the script for the rest of her life. She spent the next decade trying to recreate the magic of 1992, while simultaneously sleeping next to the man who resented her for it. She didn't die solely because of what happened in that bathtub in 2012. Whitney Houston began to die slowly, piece by piece, starting in that trailer on the Warner Brothers lot. She died a little every time she apologized for her success. She died a little every time she let him win an argument just to stop the yelling. She died a little every time she chose the pipe over her voice. She won the world, but she lost herself in the process. The bodyguard protected her from fans, from stalkers, from the press. But who was there to protect her from the man she loved? Is there any tragedy greater than conquering the world only to be defeated in your own bedroom? Today, when we hear, "I will always love you," we shouldn't just hear a love song. We should hear the sound of a woman fighting for her life. We should hear the resilience of a mother who walked through fire. Whitney Houston was not weak. She was incredibly strong to have survived that dynamic for as long as she did. But even Superman has kryptonite, and for Whitney, it was the need to be loved by a man who was incapable of loving her the way she deserved. Her story is a warning, but it is also a testament to her greatness. Despite the chaos, despite the pain, she gave us magic that will last forever. But we must ask ourselves, was the price too high? As we close this chapter on the true story of the bodyguard era, I want you to look at her differently the next time you see that music video. Don't just see the star, see the survivor. If you could go back to 1992 and say one thing to Whitney Houston in that trailer, what would it be? Tell me in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that reveal the human cost of Hollywood glory.